Hello everyone. Unfortunately, the first time I made this video, my sound died, so I'm going to have to redo the second half of this video. Alright, so for the Zerg, we have the Ultras Carol, and the Ultras Carol is a really powerful melee attacker. And the Ultras Carol has three different passives. The first passive increases the Ultras Carol's armor, and it also makes it so that whenever the Ultras Carol takes damage from melee attackers, that some of that damage is returned. So it's a lot like the passive ability that the Crypt Lord had in Warcraft 3. The Ultra Scarrow also has a passive that increases its speed, its movement speed, and the Ultra Scarrow's ultimate is an ability called Cleave. Now normally the Ultra Scarrow can't deal splash damage, but if you research Cleave, if you learn Cleave, then the Ultra Scarrow will deal splash damage. So it's a very useful ability to learn. The Ultra Scarrow also has a single spell ability, and this is called Ram. Now I think in the beta, the Ultras actually had two different attacks, one for buildings and another for units. So I thought, why not make an attack out of the Ram attack animation? So Ram is a pretty interesting ability. What happens is you can select the direction to ram into, and the Ultras will attack in that direction while moving forward, and he'll push aside units in his way, both enemies and allies. And all the enemy units that the Ultras Carol pushes aside while using this ability will be stunned and have damage dealt to them. So I'll just use it on these Zerglings. You can see that Ultras Carol attacks and moves forward as he uses this ability. And then all these Zerglings were pushed aside. The Zerglings weren't stunned or damaged because they aren't enemy units, but if they were, then they would be both stunned and damaged. So this should be a pretty interesting ability, because you can use it, for example, if you're surrounded, you could use it to push aside enemy units and escape. Or alternatively, you could use it to try to kill an enemy hero by stunning them and dealing additional damage. A second hero we have for the Zerg is the Overlord hero. And the Overlord hero is an interesting hero. The Overlord hero starts out as sort of a slow caster unit with a lot of life, but as the game progresses, the Overlord hero gets significantly more mobile. The Overlord Hero's first ability is a spell called Disease Cloud. So what it does is the Overlord Hero launches a Disease Cloud and creates a Disease Cloud at the target location. And enemy units that enter the Disease Cloud have a reduction to the armor and take damage over time. So it should be a useful area of effect damage spell. The Overlord Hero also has two different passives. The Overlord Hero's first passive increases its speed, and the Overlord Hero's second passive is called Ventral Sacs. And what this does, it allows the Overlord Hero to become a flying unit. So it's a lot like the Phoenix Hero's flight. And of course, while the Overlord Hero is flying, it can attack air units, but not ground units. But the difference between this and flight is Ventral Sacs doesn't cost any energy to maintain, and also, you can research it. You can learn it 3 times. And initially, when you learn it the first time, the Overlord Hero doesn't move very fast in the air. But as you learn this ability more and more, the Overlord Hero becomes significantly faster in the air. And the Overlord Hero's ultimate is an ability called Generate Creep. So what it does, if you use it, the Overlord Hero will start creating creep, and this will create a patch of creep around the Overlord. The Overlord Hero can move around while creating creep. And one thing about creep is that it's player-owned in this game. So, it's team-owned in this game, so only your teammates will benefit. So if you're facing a Zerg team and your team's also Zerg, the enemy team will not benefit from your creep. For example, you see in the Zerg base that there's creep everywhere. Only your teammates will benefit from the creep in your base, and not the opponent. So this adds a bit of dynamic and should make Zerg vs. Zerg a bit more interesting. And you can turn off creep. Generating creep costs energy to maintain, and of course you can use creep both on the ground and while in the air. So it should be a useful ability. Also, I just want to say that creep Creep provides both the movement speed bonus and energy and life regeneration bonus in this game. Okay, and a hero that I think a lot of you will like is called the Defiler hero. And the Defiler was a StarCraft 1 unit that was really, really popular, but unfortunately it wasn't in StarCraft 2. Unlike the Reaver hero, I couldn't really find a good model for the Defiler hero, so instead I used a Stantipede model. Also, another thing about the Stantipede model is that it doesn't have team color, so what I did is I tinted the team color, I tinted the color of the Stantipede to the player color. So if you're, for example, red, and you have a Stantipede, that Stantipede will be tinted red. In my case, I'm teal, so the Stantipede is tinted teal. So the Defiler is easily the most powerful caster hero that the Zerg have. Of course, I imported all the Defiler sounds from StarCraft Brood War. Okay, so the Defiler hero's first ability is called Consume, and this allows the Defiler hero to consume a Zergling. And it'll eat the Zergling, and this only works on allied Zerglings, and it'll gain energy. So this is a really useful ability to get early on because it will allow the Defiler hero to use to have additional energy to cast spells. The Defiler hero also has an ability called Dark Swarm, and this creates a Dark Swarm with like insects. And what it does is units, both allied and enemy units, underneath the Dark Swarm take less damage from ranged attacks. So for example, if I have my Defiler in Dark Swarm and a Marine is attacking the Defiler, which is in the Dark Swarm, then the Defiler will take less damage. But of course, it doesn't work on like melee attacks. And actually, every single one of the Zerg heroes does have a melee attack, so it's definitely a beneficial ability in both Zerg vs. Protoss and Zerg vs. Terran. And if you research this ability 3 times, it'll actually make it so that units under Dark Swarm are completely immune to ranged damage, just like in StarCraft 1. The Defiler hero's third ability is an ability called Plague. And what it does is it creates an area of plague, and units within that area get plagued. And plague lasts for a short period of time, and units that are plagued take damage. But the interesting thing about plague is that it will not reduce the unit's damage below. It will not kill a unit. It will reduce their life as far as 1, but it won't reduce it further. Also, plague neglects shields, so it can be useful against Protoss. The Defiler hero's ultimate is an ability called Insect Swarm, and I really do like this ability because it took a bit of time to get the effect the way I really wanted it. So it's based on the Crypt Lord's Locust Swarm ultimate from Warcraft, and if you click it, it'll create a swarm of 24 insects that go in random directions, and if they see an enemy, they will attack it. So for example, these insects are attacking the photon cannon. And it's a really powerful ability, but the insects will die after a while, so you should make sure you use it only during team fights, and don't waste it. So the final hero is the Nidus Worm hero. And the Nidus Worm hero is definitely one of my favorite heroes, and I think it should be a lot of fun to use. The Nidus Worm hero has an ability called Parasite, and it's a lot like the Parasite ability from StarCraft Brood War. For example, you can use Parasite on an enemy unit, and if you use it on the enemy unit, then you'll gain Sight on the enemy unit. So for example, I now have Sight on this first attack. But it's Parasite with a bit of a twist. What it does is it shoots a parasitic worm, and it'll deal a bit of damage initially to the target. But in addition to giving Sight, if a unit dies while it is parasited, then what's called a wormling will be spawned from the unit's corpse. So here we have a wormling, and it's basically just a miniature Nidus worm. So yeah, that's what Parasite does. The Nidus Worm hero also has 2 different passives. Its first passive is Annelid regeneration. And what it does is it makes it so that every time the Nidus Worm hero takes damage, there's a small chance, based on how much damage is taken, that that a wormling will be produced. The idea is sort of like, if you cut a worm in half, both halves will grow into a new worm. So it's sort of like that. The idea is that whenever the Nidus Worm hero takes damage, a piece of his flesh will fall off, and that has a chance of becoming a new worm. So here you can see that a bunch of wormlings were created because my Nidus Worm hero took damage. And wormlings aren't that strong, but they're a bit stronger than larvae and a bit weaker than zerglings. But I hope that makes the Nidus Worm hero a bit interesting. The Nidus Worm hero also has an ability called Leech Life, and this is just a passive that allows the Nidus Worm hero to... it basically is the Nidus Worm hero life steal, so whenever it attacks a unit, it gains some life. And this should work very well with the Nidus Worm's other passive. So it can attack, gain life, and then whenever it loses life, it creates more wormlings. And the Nidus Worm hero's ultimate ability is called Leap. And this is definitely one of my favorite ultimate abilities. Because the idea behind Leap is really, really simple. Basically, you target a location, the Nidus Worm hero leaps out of the ground into the air, and then lands at the target location. And the Nidus Worm hero deals damage to units on the way. But it has lots of uses. For example, it does damage on impact and launch, so you could use it. You could use it in combat to deal additional damage. Alternatively, the Nidus Worm hero can't usually attack air units, but you can use Leap to attack air units. Like you see there, I damaged the Overlord hero while he was flying using Leap. And a third use of that, of Leap, is that you can actually use it to jump cliffs. So for example, I could use it on this cliff, and I jump right over the cliff. So it's a really, really versatile ability, and this is sort of what I want to encourage. I want to encourage creativity. I want to make lots of abilities have lots of different uses, and I want players to figure out the best use at any given time to use these abilities. So that's it for heroes. I guess I'll just quickly go over items now. Before I get items started, I just want to mention a few things. One thing I see a lot of map makers do is they will use item containers whenever they do items. So if a player wants to access their items, and this is for a lot of maps, they'll have to click an item slot, and then this will give like an item container right here, and then they'll be able to access items. And the problem with item containers is, one, it's hard to get to your items, and two, you can't even use hotkeys with that. If a map maker is watching this and they want to give a hero an item like an inventory, but the inventory is less, the inventory is 6 slots or less, then don't use item containers. Just use item slots directly. For example, here you can see that we have an inventory. And the advantage of this is, one, it's a lot easier to access your items, and secondly, you can actually use hotkeys for your items. So if you press the number lock, and you can use the numbers 0 to 5 on your number pad to access items. And another thing, a mistake I see a lot of players do on their map is they make it so that you can only browse items when your hero is like 2 inches from a shop. And I think this is a shame, because one thing I used to do in Dota is, let's say your hero's damaged and you want to send him back to for example, the fountain to heal. I used to use that time to read all the items, to learn the game, and to decide what to buy next. So in Hero Attack, you can browse items when your hero isn't nearby. So this should give you enough time to decide what to get with your money. Okay, so for items, I gave each race 3 weapon and 3 armor items. They're pretty straightforward. Weapons increase damage, and armor reduces damage. But the thing about armor and weapon items is you can only have 1 of each. So if I buy 2 of them and I